welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here on this Sunday afternoon. Let's begin by getting reacquainted and acquainted with the incredible work of our esteemed panelists. And if everyone on the panel would share, introduce yourselves, your work, and your activism, and we'll begin with Sasanna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sasanna, and I am the daughter of Wang Yuyun. I'm also the granddaughter of the Empress Wang Yingoi, who is currently at Laguna Honda. She was the recipient of an unfortunate attack back in January. And I'm also a trauma-informed yoga teacher, mindfulness movement instructor, and a community healer. My work has spanned a decade of working in violence prevention and anti-bullying nonprofits, and I also, in my own personal experience, have been a student of pain science because of my body experiencing chronic pain for over a decade. And so a student of social emotional intelligence, personal responsibility, and transformational work, and now feeling that my contribution to the world is really sharing the tools that have worked for me in healing and offering that. Thanks.
Eddie.
Happy New Breath, everyone. This is Eddie Zhang. I'm the outgoing co-director of the Asian Prisoner Support Committee that is based in Oakland. The organization is to raise awareness about the mass incarceration and deportation impact have on the Asian American Pacific Islander population. And I'm the current founder and president of the New Breath Foundation. The foundation's vision is really trying to create a seat at the philanthropy table and disrupt traditional philanthropy practices by mobilizing fundings to support the marginalized community.
And Helen.
And I'm Helen Zia. I have been an activist. I'm a writer. I write about issues of social justice. I'm a writer because I'm an activist, and my activism related to what we're going to be talking about today was, I guess, most begun in 1982 with the hate crime against a young man in Detroit, Michigan, where I was working and at the time unemployed as when the auto industry collapsed, who was killed in a hate crime because the young Chinese American looked Japanese at a time of incredible xenophobia and anti-Asian racism. And that became, through the activism of the community, which I was part of, became a national civil rights movement for Asian Americans that really brought Asian American communities together. And from that time, which now is 36 or so years ago, I have been involved in different anti-violence activities, including family violence, domestic violence, homophobic issues, tracking hate crimes, linking violence based on gender, perceived sexual orientation, perceived ability, all of the things that get linked together in anti-hate crime work and anti-violence work, to really talk about it as part of a spectrum of violence in our communities and how we can use that to link our communities, because even though it may be one community, say in the example of a hate crime that's being targeted, really the thread of violence is all one and can bring our communities together so that we can all live in peace.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing. And again, how incredible it is to be sharing space with all three of you. Let's begin with a question for Sasanna. Sasanna, local news organizations, and even a national, Nextshark, for example, and the San Francisco Chronicle has reported that there have been 9 other high-profile or reported incidents of violent attacks involving Asian persons in the San Francisco Bay Area since the horrible attack of your grandmother back in January. So 9 other incidents that we know of this year alone. And the most recent one in November, in which 3 elders were attacked near Portsmouth Square. The local news continues to report this as a rise in attacks and targeted against Asian elders or Chinese American community here in San Francisco. Because of your traumatic experience involving your grandmother and also being highly visible in news and going through that whole experience, do you feel that there is in fact a rise in attacks of our community and that they are targeted?
Growing up, I've heard a lot of stories of attacks, so I don't know if there's necessarily a rise in attacks. These incidences have been going on prior to me being born. And hearing about these traumatic stories over and over again have partially been a cause of my own chronic pain, what I hold in my body. What I'm learning to now let go of. And what I notice is there is a rise in the reporting. There is a rise in sharing of our stories. Each of us finding our voice to let others know what is happening in our communities, and so we don't have to carry all this alone. And I also notice a rise in the brutality, the level of violence, not the level of violence, but the kinds of violence. Just similar, the example with my grandmother, she was 100% independent, going to Chinatown, buying her groceries, cooking soup, enjoying her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and now she's 100% permanently disabled. And so the level of brutality on someone, I think that has arisen, and the brazenness, the audacity to do it in broad daylight, to attack someone without care of consequences. And I think the targeting of Asian persons may, from my perspective, we maybe do not, our way of presenting ourselves in the world may be stereotyped as weak, meek, silent, shy. And we get to be more emboldened. We get to stand in our power and not be victims and not cower, right? For all of us to practice this type of self-defense is standing in our humanity together, standing in our truth. So I think the targeting is probably because there's just a stereotype of Asian people being vulnerable, and the seniors are vulnerable, and so the community gets to uplift each other and support the most vulnerable population.
The most vulnerable of our population. It brings me to the second question, which is for Helen, and it's pretty accurate to say that many of our communities are experiencing a rise in violent attacks, or at least it's being reported more and more, as you say, Susanna. So, Helen, there are reports of violent attacks that are on the rise for minority communities, communities of color, LGBTQ, and more. So in recent conversations regarding violence in the Asian American community, it's hard not to bring up the case of Vincent Chin and accountability. And I think that it's incredibly important to continue to talk about history and talk about what happened in that case, because the case changed not only discourse around what communities are defined under hate crimes, but also shed light on accountability and who needs to be held for it. So from education to those in society who might blame others for what's going on, to elected officials or people in power, we have more tools now and are less disenfranchised as we once were as an Asian American community back in the 80s. But Helen, in your opinion, who needs to be held accountable for these recent types of attacks in order for us to address what's happening and move forward?
Well, when you look at periods of violence, periods of hate, which when Vincent Chin was killed, actually, there wasn't a hate crimes movement. You know, there was talking about civil rights, attacks based on religion, national origin, race. But one thing that's very clear, it's the climate that we live in. And so there are periods of time, you know, Vincent Chin was killed in the early 1980s, the collapse of the auto industry and manufacturing, and the entire manufacturing sector of America began in the late 1970s and continued into the 80s. And Michigan was devastated, but from the halls of Congress to the top corporate executives and union leaders throughout America were saying we should, Honda, Toyota, Pearl Harbor, let's send the Enola Gay back to Japan. We are at war. And on the ground level, people were encouraged to trash any car with a sledgehammer. And so, that was of a Japanese make. Interestingly, they let the German make low gas consumption cars alone, but it was a time just filled with hate constantly in the news. And we all know after 9/11, there was a similar period of Islamophobia, and we are, I don't think, really out of that time now, where anybody who, quote, looks Muslim has a target on their back. And so we go through times like that, and the accountability is it starts at the top. And here we are today, on the question of whether there is a rise. The organizations that track hate crimes and violence of all kinds, including gender-based violence, homophobic violence, anti-Semitic violence, racial violence, they have all gone up significantly. And in my mind, and I think many of us, we see that starting right there at the, and I'll call it the white supremacy house, that supports supremacy, neo-Nazism, dictators all over the world, celebrates them. And so, I don't want to get on a political soapbox here, but that's where the climate begins. It's not like there weren't hate groups around. And so as a journalist, I actually did a lot of investigation of why women join hate groups when they are not only, filled with hate for xenophobic and other reasons, but also they're pretty misogynist as well. So why would a woman join that? Well, anyway, that's not the topic here, but those groups existed. Those paramilitary groups existed. But what's happening is there's a climate to encourage them, to cheer them on, to let them know that it's okay from the top. And so in terms of accountability, we as a society have to, not accept that because, it really is, hate violence, and Susanna was just talking about the level of the kind of violence there is. That's one thing that, is a consistent theme. If you look at hate crime episodes, that the intensity of the violent attack is off the charts, and in the harm that is done to the individuals. So, number one, as a society, we definitely have to, in every systemic part of our society, whether it's education, within the workplace, within our communities, in the political sphere, hold those leaders, and whether it's our PTA people or school board or all the way to Washington D.C., hold them accountable and let them know that this is just not acceptable. But on a one-on-one basis as well. There are times that we can all speak up and just say, this is not acceptable in some form or another. I hear you, I hear what you're saying, and to take personal responsibility for that too. Because as a former journalist, news and society, they benefit from, fear. Fear is one of the top reasons to have a headline that will sell newspapers or internet views or any of those things. Fear is what politicians, feed off of to get where they want to go. So it's part of our responsibility to say, what, this is not healthy for our communities, and it's not healthy for us to carry that fear, to walk down the street, and to always be aware of who's around us or what. If instead we can learn to speak with each other and have conversations in our communities to encourage, empathy, compassion for a hate crime that happens in the African American community, that the Asian American community will be equally as irate about that as we would be, toward violence, toward our communities.
We'll get to the topic of fear and how that plays into social media and the media, in which all of our panelists will get to add their thoughts to it. The next question is for Eddie. I think, Eddie, you have a very unique perspective, and more than likely a most important perspective into understanding this question of why. I think it's human nature when we're impacted or we experience a senseless, violent attack or something that bad happens to us. We want to ask this question of why? Why is this happening, or why did it happen to me? Especially in a time of chaos and fear or unprovoked attacks, we had mentioned. You've been on the side of perpetrator and now, holding workshops to prevent crime and helping those, who are incarcerated in our own community. Help us understand some of the reasons why you think these attacks happen, or answering that question, that very probably impossible question of why.
Yeah, well, Michelle, I think, we need 2-3 hours to really talk about some of this complexity and intersection of these issues. But for me, as someone who grew up in prison, right, from age 16 to age 37, as a result of the crime that I committed in San Francisco against an Asian family, right? So I think my victim were asking the same thing, like, why us? Right? We didn't do anything to anybody. We just an immigrant family who wants to have a good life, who wants to make sure the next generation be able to have the same opportunity or having a better life than the one that they had. But yet, myself and two of my partners, just violated their whole family, So I ended up having to spend 21 years of my life incarcerated, right? So, but at the time, for me, the reason I committed a crime was because as a new immigrant coming to this country, I wasn't able to really appreciate all the sacrifices that was made by my grandparents, by my parents, so I can have a better life. So because the language barrier, cultural difference, and generation gaps, I wasn't really able to adjust. And then I was on the wrong path very quickly, right? And I had to pay dearly for it, right, in this process. And so the question of why, since I was released like almost 13 years ago, I immersed myself in violence prevention and youth empowerment in the Bay Area community, right, specifically in San Francisco. And I just remember I've been to so many funerals for many of the Black and Latinx folks in the city of San Francisco, right? And then, of course, I also been to some of the Asian American funerals also, and this is all a result of violence in the neighborhoods and in the community. But I think that when we ask the question why, I think automatically for me it's like, how do I take responsibility for my actions? How do I be accountable, right, to the harm that I would say I perpetuated? And then how do I find healing in that process? And so when I was able to really learn, and be responsible for my actions, then I was able to really get on this path of healing and this process of creating spaces for others to do the same. And the structural racism in this country really is permeated not only in the United States of America, but really is on an international level, right? Because I remember when I was 10 years old, I was in China. I had never met an African-American person, but I already know how to call them black devils. So where did that come from, right? So when we ask the question why, we have to really look at the imperialism, right? And about being the most powerful nation of the world. How racism is perpetuated globally, and then that impacts our community. Within the way that we talk to each other, the way we treat each other, that plays a big part of that why, right? But of course, we can talk a little bit more about it as we explore some of the intersection of it.
I'm hoping this is just the beginning of a series of conversations that we'll have, because you're right, Eddie. It's going to take more than just 5 minutes of answering that question, and that leads to the next question, which we'll start with Helen. But in as far as like the narrative or the story that gets told, which then adds on to other people's perspective of what's happening, and then, in my opinion, could also lead to fear. This idea of fear mongering. I was really kind of shocked in doing some research when I came across an interview that was done on NPR with a San Francisco Chronicle reporter. And the reporter was very specific about the racial tension in the community and touched on anti-Asian violence. So the question is really, if you've, starting with Helen, in talking about also holding the media, and now, social media plays a huge part in that as well, right? That there's responsibility in telling the truth and whether these incidents are racially targeted or not, because it can incite more fear, more blame, more issues within our own community. So your thoughts on the responsibility of sharing stories and truths, especially to the public, which includes local media, journalists, and yes, Facebook, social media.
Yeah. Well, that's such a huge area to unpack. Eddie just pointed to, even as a kid in China, had already had racism implanted about black people, about people who were darker than Asians, in East Asia. And, one thing I think we all have to own is that everybody has to own is that we drank the same poison. I used to say drink the same Kool-Aid, and don't drink that Kool-Aid, but now I realize that there's a whole generation that has no idea what Kool-Aid is. But that racism and that prejudice and that formation of who the other is and how dangerous and scary they are or how bad they are, and and within our own circle of our families, how good we are versus how bad everybody else is. We all have that. We all drank that same poison, right? And so part of it is really to have to unlearn that. And speaking of accountability, to hold those Hollywood studios and what's on television and what gets lifted to the top when you do a search, about some other country or culture, whether it's, Google or YouTube or whatever. Aren't they owned by the same place anyway? But, all of those things contribute to the not only the gross ignorance that we have of each other and distrust of each other, and where it gets into power systems too, is distrust and division is what keeps the status quo in power. And so, I lose sleep about where we're going as a society because we all know California, well, we all should know that California 20 years ago passed that point of being a minority-majority state. There is no majority race in America. There are already 10 other states like that. Within 10, 15 years, the whole country will be that way. And so in my mind, there's there's a reason to try to keep people fighting and ignorant of each other because, wow, if all the people of conscience and people of color and women came together, we are already in the majority vastly, we could really upend a lot. But if we are in continual distrust, and not only that, in situations that promote violence upon each other, and even within, because of course there is violence within each community too, then we can keep people separate. And media plays a huge role on that. I mean, children, as you know, babies aren't born with those prejudices, but they learn them very quickly. And so I think, we're in a very dangerous time now. There are PhDs who spend their careers working at like the Enterprise Institute or Heritage Foundation or a number of places on how to sort of get into people's heads and keep us divided. And I think there's a lot that, as we look toward the future and the society that we want to see, and not be like the fragmentation that everybody's aware of today, globally, that we've got a lot of work to do.
Can I add to the social media piece? We have the power to make our own media. And when my grandmother was attacked, I did my own reporting. I pulled out my phone, Facebook Lived the crime scene, interviewed someone, and expressed that hurt people are hurting people, that this should not be happening. And the fear of this woman that I was interviewing was so palpable that, I wasn't at this crime scene when it was happening. However, I felt her fear. And we're all walking around in these fear bodies. And social media is a place where, unfortunately, when you take a negative approach, people do spew a lot of negative things. However, taking a positive approach, which is what I've been doing with my family's story, my grandmother's story, this is a huge sacrifice of hers, and to use it as a blessing, to turn it into an opportunity for learning and growing and transformation. But we have this power in our own hands now, in our pockets. Take it out, report, share your honest feelings. I was saying, through tears and raw emotions, and right now I'm feeling the same way as I recall that day back in January, just the frustration and the pain, the anger, and all of these emotions that are coursing through me. But I have to say, I want peace still at the end of the day. I want unity and love. And if we continue going down this path of an eye for an eye, then the whole world will be blind. And yet, if we choose to focus on what is positive, then we can have these open dialogues and this connection. And so social media, or media in general, is how we use it, right? We have the tools.
Thank you for saying that. That's just so incredibly powerful. I just want to make sure you know that we need more of these types of voices and saying that, especially for a younger generation. Eddie, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question, just because, I mean, the negativity is reinforced, especially if you are guilty, if you will, of doing something bad. You're automatically a bad person to the eyes of the general public. Would love your thoughts on this, the media and its role in injecting fear, and then we lose kind of, what's the core mission when we want to put out anti-violence programs, or we want a better place, a better world for everyone, instead of focusing on that individual did something bad, therefore they should never get a chance in again, or something along those lines.
Yeah, well, social media is a blessing, it's a curse, right, at the same time. And it is because of social media that more people are able to really capture the people who are supposed to uphold the law to do the wrong thing, right? And the social media is the one that who really can mobilize people, to organize people to stand up against injustice, right? But we also know who controls the social media, and it's the people that who are, in corporations, and the people that who has the powerful, dominant narrative that they want to push out to control the social media. And that's why I'm so grateful for Susanna, because the way that you're able to really embrace how you feel, but at the same time not allow what you feel and the rage you feel and the fear that you feel to be able to not understanding that our suffering and our liberation are tied to each other, right? And I appreciate Helen, you, because when I'm looking at this book, The Asian American Dream by Helen Zia, I read this book when I was in solitary confinement in 2003 in San Quentin State Prison, and this is one of the books that really created a big influence in my life, because I'm able to really understand the true history of many of the Asian American people who came to this country for a better life, right, as a result of for multiple reasons, right? And many of them has to do with that power narrative of that imperialism, right? How people are trying to, how the push and pull factor that push immigrants and refugees to come into this country, right? And so in that narrative, I feel that as someone as a perpetrator and a victim myself, right, of crime, and I just feel that healing is not talked about enough in social media. Instead, the fear is pushed down from all levels, and that fear creates so much trauma, right? It reopens the intergenerational trauma people experience, and it traumatizes people all the time. Any second, because as soon as you open that, it depends on what feed you're in, you get traumatized, right? So Helen alluded to the fact that news media is like, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. It's what sells news and what brings people to be afraid, and that's how they're going to make money. And yet, the grassroots social media, oftentimes we don't have enough of that platform because of the lack of resources that we have. And then it's easy for us to continue to be comfortable in our own lives and in our own space, depending on our social stratifications and the color of our skin, the male privileges, because all of that, we could be very comfortable in our own skin and not really understanding the fact that, when other people suffer, we're going to suffer too, right? And when we suffer, it all depends on whether it's happening today or tomorrow, but it all impacts to all of us. So how are we going to be able to promote more healing and more love, within our community?
Well, let's do it. Let's start talking about healing. It's for all of our panelists. If you want to join in, we'll start with Susanna, though. I mean, you and Eddie, it's from doing readings, we know that you have transformed your life through the trauma that you had faced. And let's talk about the importance of unity and being supported by other people in overcoming the trauma, and then transforming that energy into being stronger, and then giving back to your community, which is so incredible.
Thanks, Michelle. I love this. The healing piece is, so let's backtrack a bit. When on the day of the attack, January 8th, 4 days later, I created this event called Healing Through Solidarity and Song. Eddie and Cynthia Chai out in the audience from Chinese for Affirmative Action, and 100 other peoples came to support. A few of you are also in the audience. The amount of energy in that room, from the grief and the pain, but also in the wish to do something, this desire to do something together in community, was powerful. And if I didn't reach out and share the story on Facebook, then it wouldn't have garnered support. I would have been like many other victims, sweeping it under the carpet and saying, "Oh, it's my bad luck. I don't want to air my dirty laundry. I will be ridiculed." But instead, to share it and connect with community leaders like Eddie and Zia and yourself, Michelle, and the healing is starting because we're having the space to talk about what's going on inside me, what's going on inside my family and the community.
Yeah, for me, it's definitely tapping into the chi, right? And the chi that I'm talking about is not just the breath, the energy that sustain our lives. The chi that I'm talking about is culture, history, and identity. Because of that chi, that I was able to heal the trauma that I experienced, and then really trying to put myself in the shoes of victims. How they're feeling as victimized, right? And I'll just share a quick story. After I came out, one of the worst fear that I had was like losing my mother, because I don't know if I was going to get out of prison or not. And when I came out, I was able to spend time and actually live with my mother. But one day she was attacked. She was attacked by African American right outside of the front yard. And then so when she went to the emergency room, and my family, everybody is like saying, "Oh, this black devil, black devil." I said, "Hey, we just with this African American person that this to our mother, not every black people, in the country." And then so a few months later, my brother also at gunpoint, was robbed by two African Americans. And then of course he was like, "Man, I'm gonna kill them, and they all bad people, they're no good." So I challenged him, say, "Hey, look, it's two African Americans that who really robbed you, and we don't condone that. I'm upset as you, right? But it's not everyone, right?" Then I was robbed at gunpoint by the African American, and I just remember the police, was doing a report, and the police officer asked me. It's a Chinese police officer, just so happened, and he asked me, "If we arrest this perpetrator, would you be willing to testify against him?" And my immediate response was, I said, "If you catch this perpetrator, I want to have a restorative justice method in dealing with him." He said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "If you arrest him, you're able to arrest him, if you bring him to me, and I get an opportunity to ask like his upbringing, what causes him to want to rob people and put himself in harm and put other people in harm, and I share my story as a perpetrator with him, and if he's willing to apologize and I'm able to refer resources for him," I said, "There's no reason for me to testify against him." And so I have to really counter this narrative of anti-blackness, right, that is really indoctrinated in our community, especially in the Asian American community, right? Just because there are a lot of victimizations happen, even though when we talk about the rise of crime targeting Asian Americans, well, there's always crime happening, right? And the question that we have to ask is like, why is crime happening? And what community has not experienced crime, right? And why would people want to commit crime? Is it because for economic reasons? Is it because of mental health reasons? Is it because, the deep-seated racism, the institutional racism, right, or sexism, or what is it? What is the reason? So those are the things that allow me to be able to heal in some ways, because I'm able to not only understand about my culture and history, but I'm able to understand other people's culture and history. So that allowed me to heal, right, in that process and be very intentional about cross-cultural healing and bringing people together.
Wow. I have to say, I'm just so in awe of Susanna and Eddie and the strength you have inside, and chi, and the energy you're able to bring for healing yourselves. And as somebody who has been more, as an activist, first I want to say the men who killed Vincent Chin were Anglo-American men who, even though, when I say this is in Detroit, and in hearing this story, I want to say that because there's almost maybe an assumption, that they're going to be African American people who killed Vincent, but it wasn't. And one of the things, as having even now still working on that case to bring justice one day to why Vincent was killed and what he stands for in our communities around fighting hate. The thing about it is, for me, the healing is around trying to not have it happen again, or to try to stop it from happening as much as it does, And so the healing for me is the activism part too. And I know both of you are amazing activists, and that's taking the rage, taking the fear, taking the emotion, and turning it into action. To say, nothing would bring back Vincent Chin's life. And the saddest day I had in my activist life was having to tell his mother that after we had exhausted everything in the criminal justice system and the civil rights federal system and his killers still had not spent a single day in jail, which was also part of the tragedy. But to have to tell her that, no, there was nothing else we could do about that. But what we could do was to try to continue this movement to bring people together, black, white, brown, yellow, red, every religion and gender, sexual orientation, who had joined us in this and more in this civil rights movement, to say together we can do something about this. And there were many changes in the law that actually happened because of this. One was victims' rights. That was one of the things that changed nationally. The hate crimes protection, which California actually had one of the first bills passed on that. Things like that movement to try to take, to make action also be part of the healing process. Because one of the things that Vincent Chin's mother would say is, I don't want any other mother to experience, the pain I have, that my only child and my whole future that she envisioned for herself, to have grandchildren one day and a family to look forward to, were taken from her. But the one thing that she could hold on to have her son's life have meaning was to not have any other mother experience that again. And the harm that was done to your grandmother is still there. But having the meaning to let other people know, one way to take that and bring people together, bring people together. And Susanna, I have to say, I've watched you on television and just and was amazed at how you were able to, do that. And if anybody here hasn't, please, go and search on YouTube and just see. And to take all of that, that's the healing part, to help heal as a society too. And through that, the transformation and the healing as an individual can happen too.
I can't believe we've already gone through over 40 minutes together, and of course, there's a lot more that we need to uncover and unpack, and I'm hoping that will happen at a future discussion or talk, and this is part of a series. One last question, we have to be quick because we want to open it up to the floor for your questions to our panelists. The mayor has spoken. Board of Supervisors such as Gordon Marr, Aaron Peskin have spoken and addressed the violence that's impacting our community. There's reports of more, at least somebody saying it, maybe the police chief, but that there are more police officers foot patrolling certain areas and more traffic lights. Sure, that can be part of the solution or what we do in hopes that another attack doesn't happen. But if you could leave us all very, very quickly, 3 things that all of us can do to be a part of the solution, that would be wonderful. We'll start with Susanna.
Albert Einstein says that the most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or hostile universe. And despite what has happened to my grandmother, I still believe in this friendly universe, in this benign, kind universe. And one thing I would suggest is holding that positivity, that light in your heart. And I hold it in my heart. And when I find myself focusing on the negative, the anger and the hatred hardens my heart and poisons it, that's when I notice it's hell. And I take action down a very bad path of hurting other people. So I shift, practicing taking a breath to shift, practicing feeling in your body what it's like when these emotions bubble up to the surface. It may feel like rapid heartbeat. It may feel like shaking. And so this is a sign that your body is saying, take a breath. Let's all take a breath. And then we get to choose very powerfully. We all get to choose. We decide positivity. What can we do? If it's to be, it's up to me. Right? And so choosing this other way, choosing to connect with folks that know how to do it.
Eddie?
Yeah, I always say that we have to be willing to have a personal revolution before we can embark on a collective revolution. Because that requires vulnerability, that requires a lot of honesty and transparency within yourself. You really search, like, where do you belong, in this world, right? And how do you contribute to it? That's one thing. The second thing is definitely connecting to the qi, right? Tapping into the qi. The cultural history and identity piece is so crucial for us to be able to humanize each other, right? Because if we don't, then we're always going to be divide and conquered, right? So I think the last thing is we minimize ourselves and our abilities all the time. So we should each cherish ourselves and be good to ourselves, right? And when we're doing that, then we'll be helping other people to cherish themselves also.
Wow. Well, I'll say three things, but I think it's very similar in what one is educate. That means educate ourselves and gets to what Eddie was just saying about the cultural, historical part. And but we, have to recognize our own ignorance and, not only to identify the poison that we ourselves have absorbed, but also to unlearn that and to learn the revolution that he's talking about begins with ourselves. That's very true. And also the people around us and the communities around us. And so this is holiday season. Many of us are going to be around family. We have these in our family, the narratives that are there. It can begin there. Of course, you don't want to have a family fight, but, there are things that can be said, right? The second would be also, as you do this ourselves, and speaking as an Asian American, to be visible. But for all of us to be visible with what we learn and so forth. We had talked about the targeting, for example, or the feelings or the impression that the Asian American community is being targeted. Well, part of that is within our communities, people say, oh, don't make waves, don't be visible, don't talk, don't stand up, which on this stage is not what is happening. But, that whole thing about a vulnerable community, Asians make a perfect target because they'll never complain. I remember that's one of the stereotypes, right? They'll never fight back. They're weak people. I remember one newscast about a robbery that took place. If it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. It was an attack on a robbery of an Asian American person. And the newscaster said, well, Asians are targeted because they carry lots of money and gold, and and they won't fight back. And it's kind of like, wow, you just made a complete target of this community. And so part of it is to be visible and to show that we're not, that is not who we are. And we won't be defined that way. And for Asian American women, who in particular, it's not a mistake or coincidence that so many of the lawsuits for sexual harassment and sexual assault that we hear about from Silicon Valley or whatever is toward Asian American women, because, on the one hand, they're supposed to be, exotic creatures. On the other, they're passive and they won't fight back. Okay, there is a stereotype for people who may be targeted. So that's one thing, to be visible and to speak up and to show we will fight back in every way we know. And then I guess the other thing is just say, organize, organize, organize. Every one of our communities come together. That's where we amplify the voices that we have. And to say we won't stand for this. This is not who we are as a people, as communities together. And, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, the arc of history bends toward justice. And I will add, if we help make it bend. And so that's on all of us.
All right, now it's time for questions from the audience. We don't have a lot of time. I'm really sorry, but you can tell this incredible panel, we had a lot to say.
Hi there. So my name is Jenny. Susanna, thank you for inviting me. I looked forward to seeing you today. And I really admired what you all had to say with regard to getting at the root of the fear and hatred, because there is no, say, incarcerating our way out of this situation. And if it's going to, as you mentioned, be an eye for an eye, we're eventually all going to be blind. So with that said, how would you, aside from organizing, one of the common themes, one of the repeated themes was with regard to accountability. What, in my opinion and my experience, my witness, what perpetuates a lot of this fear, if not anger, is the feeling of accountability, whether it be the perpetrator or the people in power who are supposed to keep these checks and balances that aren't doing their job. So how would you say that people would be held accountable so that we can end this cycle of meanness, this bullying, this violence, and et cetera? Because in regards to accountability, you're right. It does make people feel very vulnerable, but also it is a check in this balance that we all need. And it's interesting you mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King, because I've held him as a historical icon of mine my entire life. And in regards to accountability, when we all try and see each other as an equal, it's like, I know from personal experience, I've certainly tried to do that, but then the other party, be it the Latinx or the African American, for some reason is not able to come to the middle ground or to come to the same table to do that. What is it that's holding it back? Granted, these are stereotypes, but there is truth to it. So what is your idea in perpetuating accountability and ending these stereotypes so that we all really can act on the same playing field?
I'm going to ask one person who feels a burning desire to answer that, to answer. What do you think?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Ellen.
I'll just start. Accountability is one thing, but at least meeting together, that's where it starts, right? If we're talking about communities together. And, if there are any potential ways to invite, people of different communities or where the tension is, to an open discussion and to make it clear that it's going to be open. When the Vincent Chin case happened, we had a very tiny Asian American population there. And of course, Detroit, even back then, was more than 60, almost 70% African American. And so we had the support of the African American community leaders. And so some of us were invited to be on a black radio music program, Motown. And so it was a call-in program. And so I and another of the Asian American activists who were calling for a civil rights investigation were on there trying to explain what it is we were doing. Who are we as Asian Americans? This is Detroit in 1980s. People still thought we had just landed fresh off the boat. So it's like, who are you people? So part of it was doing Asian Americans 101 because people don't know. And so there's a lot of ignorance there. And then, callers were very honest with their questions too.
And in closing, we're going to invite Karen back up. I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you to our esteemed panelists, all of them, Helen, Eddie, Sasana.